Welcome to everyone, and I'm Mary Manley from the Sheldon. I know most of you. The talks today are in conjunction with our current exhibit, Addison County Collects. How many have seen the show already? Anybody? A few? Good. Okay. So you may already know the premise, but what we did was put together an exhibit. We invited Addison County residents, if they had a collection that they wanted to share. The deal was they had to share only one item, and that is not easy when someone has a collection. How to narrow it down is impossible. I know Bruce was like, oh my gosh, I have 450 of them. And so we stretched it a little bit and put, how many, 4 of yours are in there? 3. We put 3 of his in. I broke the rules just a little bit. But it's a wonderful grouping, a very diverse grouping of objects based on these collections. And we were delighted to find out that not only does Addison County collect, but all continents, except with the exception of Antarctica, are represented. It's a very international exhibit. We didn't even expect that, but people travel, people live other places, so it's just been a really fun experiment. And when I worked at the High Museum in Atlanta, we had an exhibit that featured exhibit collectors in Atlanta, and I had that idea, but that was not my idea, but I had in my mind the idea one day maybe I'll be able to do that another place where I'm working. So here at the Sheldon, we put it together, and so it's been a while coming, but I'm real excited about it, and who knows, there might be part 2. But what we've done now is invited some of the collectors. Any of the collectors that said, yes, I would like to share my collection, then we invited them to speak. So today we have 4 collectors. We have, well, let's see if I can do this in order. First speaker is going to be Nola Kevra. Second will be LaFiandra. I will be number 3, and Bruce Burgess will be number 4. So they'll tell you more about them and about their collection. So I'm not going to really introduce them any further, but I'm really excited you're here to listen in and learn more. Now the way we'll do it is I told everyone 10 minutes, and Bruce brought a clock. And you can look at the clock, and if you notice we're going over, just raise your hand, because I want everybody to get at least 10 minutes in. And then if we have a little more time to spare, absolutely questions, probably at the end. So everybody will present, and then we'll see how it flows. Very informal. I mean, if you have to shout out a question, then you may.
Do you want to mention there are going to be 2 more?
Yes, I will. I can do that now as well.
Okay.
We are going to have 2 more of these sessions. So next Wednesday and the following. So it'll be the 7th of September, the 14th of September. They're on our website, so you can see which collections are featured on all those days, but at noon again. So without further ado, I have Nola here, who has an incredible quilt on view in the exhibit, too big to bring in here, and I didn't want to dare do that. So I have printed pictures of the quilt for you all to look at while Nola is talking. Nola, I'm going to turn it over to you. You come right up here, and I'll get pictures out for everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm going to begin by sharing a Robert Frost quote. Do you all know who Robert Frost is? Okay. Aside from all of his fame and fortune, he's also my neighbor. His cabin is about 3 miles in the woods from our home. And briefly, this has very little to do with the quilt except that people are neat. Back in 1993, shortly after I moved to Ripton, I was diagnosed with a brain tumor and told I'd be dead soon. I'm still here. And so we go, yeah, I'm really happy to do that. We go in time now from 93 to 2006, and I'm with a group of young students from the Ripton School, and their teacher had just given them homework. And the whole class, very subtly, let out a groan. And then it was my turn to be with these students. And so I said to them, and this wasn't planned, I said, you guys, what if you had so much homework that your brains exploded? And they all laughed. And then I said, well, here. And once again, this was all off the cuff. He said, let's see how many Robert Frost poems I can memorize before my brain explodes. I can't stop. I'm just addicted to the guy's poetry. So this one is a gift to you. It's called A Time to Talk. When a friend calls to me from the road and slows his horse or her horse to a meaning walk, I don't stand still and look around at all the hills I haven't hoed and shout to her or him from where I am. What is it? No, not as there is a time to talk. I thrust my hole in the mellow ground blade end up and 5 feet tall, and I plod. I go up to the stone wall for a friendly visit. And I think that is something we are desperately in need of in the world we live in today. So I thank you for taking the time to come today and talk and learn and be together. We all have families. Maybe some of us don't know where these families came from or even know family members. I hope that's not true. I know kids today have that problem. I have a family. My mom's parents came from the Middle East. My dad's parents came from Poland and Lithuania. And back, a few years back, there was a war. You know about it as well as I do. World War II. My dad was the youngest of 7 children. He was the one that got recruited to cross the ocean and fight that war. His mom and dad and the rest of his family were in a tiny little town in Pennsylvania. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called WWII, and it's a coal miner's town. And we were there for Dad's funeral 10 years ago. It hasn't changed at all. It's still a tiny little town. It's a beautiful little town, and that's where he grew up. So he left the family, and his mom, because his dad died from miner's loan quite young, was left alone. All the older kids had left. It was just her. Yes, she had the neighbors, but it was just Grandma Kevra. Her name was Domisella. And she couldn't email Dad. She had no way to be in touch with him. And so she prayed and she worried and she worried and she prayed. And she made this quilt. She did not go to Vermont Sew and Vac and get a giant machine and go. This was something she did with needle and thread and fabric. You can see what's on the piece of paper there. I hope you'll get to see the quilt in person. But it was a beautiful, beautiful quilt. Thank God my dad did come back. That's how he got to be my dad, by coming back. But the quilt lived on. And for years and years since my mom died, it's been sitting upstairs in what we call the grandmother's bedroom, where we have things from all of our grandmothers, under 4 other quilts so that the mice don't eat it. And so thankfully it's in pretty good shape right now. But it's just proof of how much she loved her son and how much she loved this country, this new country that she called home. And I feel very blessed to have that as part of my life. And so in closing, I just want to share the closing lines. Have any of you heard of John McCutcheon? No. Okay, he's a singer. And he doesn't sing rock and roll. He sings his own songs. They're folk songs. He sings amazing songs. And among the songs he sung, he has some such good ones. He did sing about that night during World War I when there was peace. He sung a song called Christmas in the Trenches. Beautiful song. But he also wrote a song called Water from Another Time. And this is how the chorus goes. I won't sing it, I promise. Okay. It don't take much, but you gotta have some. The old ways help, the new ways come. We've gotta leave a little extra for the next in line. We're gonna need a little water from another time. And that's why we're here today, I think. We all need to share what has come to who's coming next. So thank you for being here. And let's do what Mr. McCutcheon said. Keep that water flowing. Be well. Okay. These flowers here, grab one before you leave. They're from Ripton. Yes, we do grow flowers in Ripton.
Yes, Nola brought those. And now Anne LaFiandra is going to share her collection, including these nutcrackers up front. Nutcrackers.
etc.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Why? I moved to Germany in 1969 when I graduated from college because I had struggled through introductory German. It was a real struggle, and didn't want to forget everything. I thought, well, I'll just go over there and get fluent and then come back and do my real job, which was I wanted to become a librarian to get my MLS. So I moved over in 1969. I had learned enough to write a letter to get a job over there in an export book company, and arrived knowing very little fluent German, but my job was actually in English. I was the complaint department for this company for their English-speaking customers, so that part I knew I could do. So anyway, I was there. I accumulated very little in worldly goods. I didn't have much money. I'd rather travel and eat, which I did lots of. And so at the end of my stay there in '73, I realized I didn't have a souvenir. There was a tacky souvenir touristy shop in Wiesbaden, where I lived first, where the door to the shop was a giant nutcracker, and you walked through its belly. I mean, it was just so tacky. So I went, oh, well, I live here. I don't need to go in that store. And then in 1973, I thought, you know, I'll just want to have a look and get one thing. So this is what I got. 1973, it's my soldier, and I thought, well, that's nice, and I'll bring them out and, you know, use them at Christmas, not to cook nuts, but just to have them, and it's a nice souvenir. So little did I know that was going to sort of unleash a succession. And over the years, people have given me, my German friends have sent me, I have procured quite a collection. The origins, oh, and I have to say, the Nutcracker heritage really is in the former East Zone, and I couldn't get there when I lived there. It was extremely cumbersome and expensive, so I didn't harbor any hopes of getting to go to this region, to see the workshops, to buy anything from the actual craftsmen. But they were available in the West. One of the major makers emigrated to the West during the division of Germany. So the origins really are these three. These are authoritative, powerful figures. Notice the aggressive teeth. Kings, soldiers, and knights.
Wait, who's the guy in the middle?
A knight, a white knight. Okay?
Nice.
And he does have a gun. Well, you know, it's not a lance, but... And they were actually totems in homes of protection from danger. Thus these, you know, really beamy teeth that are still not easy for me to look at. So these are really the origin of the whole idea of a nutcracker. Then, over the years, post-World War II, suddenly we had two major factors. One was there were over 100,000 American GIs stationed in the former American sector, which is part of West Germany. And they loved going to the Christmas markets, which are still beautiful. And they saw these, and they fell in love with them, and they all brought them home and gave them to the families. We also had Tchaikovsky's Nutcracker Suite, ballet, which became extremely popular post-war. And this one, my in-laws got for me at the Met at a performance of the Nutcracker ballet. This is an actual East German Nutcracker. These were made in the West. So we have great popularity, and with popularity, of course, it expanded beyond the traditional and really only limited by your creative imagination and or your entrepreneurial spirit. So we had somebody who came up with the idea of limited editions. If I say limited, what does that make you want to do? I don't want to miss out, I want to get, right? Well, this is a Sugar Plum Fairy. And she is in a limited edition, just to give you an idea. She is number 3,987 of 10,000. So she's a real rare bird. But that was one post-war ploy to increase the proliferation of nutcrackers. Santa Claus, of course, was a standard additional after the idea of protection because it was usually exhibited at Christmas, and Santa gave me himself. I thought that was very sweet. Yeah. After that, other things, skiers. I have a Buckingham Palace guard. Nowadays, if you go online, you can get your favorite sports team, Nutcracker. And nowadays, soldiers won't look like that. They might be wearing camo. So again, there's no limit to where this can go. Along with, of course, and these are not inexpensive to collect. I can't remember what I paid for them or what my friends might have. But, we're talking $50 to $100 more or less. China gets in the act. Okay? They can mass produce with, their craftsmanship is inferior. And this is a king. You notice the motif. They've copied the whole idea. But it is really something you use at Christmas. It's not really a collector's item, but they became very prevalent, and you had to be careful and look on the bottom. Little side story quickly. They're called nutcrackers. So my husband loved to have a big bowl of nuts at Christmas when they all came out. So imagine what my kids thought. So when they actually used them to crack nuts, I had a fit, and Santa brought them each a Chinese nutcracker. Go at it, guys. A friend also gave my husband this one. This is also a Chinese one, but he's just hilarious. They thought it looked like Bob. Granted, it has French accents, but it's close to Italian, and he used to wear a beret. I don't know how many of you remember. He wore a beret all the time. So that's a Bob. The economics, well, I think I already mentioned it, that one company called Steinbach moved to the west, to Hohenhamel between Hanover and Würzburg, where EW comes from. And then after the war, after reunification, they moved back. So they now have 2 workshops. But the heart of this area is called Seifen. And it's where there's an actual octagonal church, which is the object in the exhibit. Other artifacts from this area, they're not all nutcrackers, are incense burners. Put a piece of incense in there, put it back together, and smoke comes out its mouth. It's called a smoker. Yeah. Let's see. Pyramids. All different sizes. The Christ child and the kings are on the bottom, and the shepherds and the angels. And you put candles, and the heat from the candles feeds the paddles and it goes around. They come in all sizes. Friends of mine sent that from Germany. I still don't know how it got here, but they did. Another very common motif is the arch. This was a mining area, and when mining died out in the 19th century, all the ore of the seams were gone, and silver and lead, tin, pretty much everything. It's the border between Czechoslovakia and Saxony. What are they going to do? Well, they had plentiful forest, and so that's why they got into woodworking. But before, they were still mining. On Christmas Eve morning, which was the traditional big day of Christmas, the miners would hang their lanterns on the entrance to the mine, looking forward, coming back to the light of the Christ child arriving. So you'll often see things with an arch motif. These little choristers and the trees are similar to the ones in the exhibit. This also has candle holders, a lot of light mentioned here. And this is quite special, also from that area. The last thing I want to close with is I was involved with a school exchange with a school in Thuringia, which is the border of West Germany and East Germany. But anyway, it's not the Czech border. It's on the more westerly border of the Elbe. You know where the Elbe is. And the faculty stayed with teachers and the students stayed with students. And I was staying with a family, an IT teacher and his wife in Weimar. And they asked me what I wanted to do on the weekend. And I said, wow, gee, you know, I've always harbored a vague wish. Wouldn't it be awesome to be able to go to Seifen, to the heart of the Erzgebirge? Erz, by the way, E-R-Z means ore. So the Erzgebirge are the mountains with the ore in them. And he went, really? Like he thought that was sort of like, sure that's what you want to do? You don't want to go to Berlin or somewhere? And I said, no, that's what I really, he said, well, that's easy. I grew up in the area. So I said, really? He said, sure, we'll do a day trip. So the next day we got in the car and we went to Erzgebirge, and I actually got to go to Seifen, with the octagonal church. And this is what I got. This is a miner. The knee pads, the insignia here is the hammer and the pick. And you're unlikely to see these in tourist shops. It's sort of boring, sort of plain. I mean, you look at the options, but very significant. So this was the last one I bought, and I don't need any more. Thank you.
About my collection of folk art. To get started, I'll tell you that I moved down south to Montgomery, Alabama in 1980 after graduate school because they said be a big fish in a little pond. And I was in DC for graduate school and everybody wanted to work at Smithsonian. So I said I'll go to Montgomery, Alabama. So while I was there, I got to know a few artists who were Southern folk artists. And I have always enjoyed collecting art by artists whom I've met so that I can have that conversation and really get to know them. So I was really excited to get to meet Mose Tolliver in 1980 when I moved there. Mose was, he really hadn't been discovered yet. He was just on the brink of becoming discovered. In 1981, there was an exhibit at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts where I was working. And then that followed the next year with an exhibit at the Corcoran Gallery in DC, which was Black American Folk Art, and I'll tell you the full title of the exhibit because I won't. Black Folk Art in America, 1930 to 1980. So he was included in that exhibit. And I remember when he was going, he was so excited. He had never left Alabama, really, the Montgomery area. And he took a train to DC with his wife, Willie Mae. And when he came back, he was so excited. And apparently, Ronald Reagan's wife, Nancy, had picked him as her favorite artist. So such a big deal. It was just fantastic for him. And from then on, he was very well known, one of the most highly recognized American folk artists, really, which means he was totally self-taught. And the reason that he was, or became an artist, he says he started painting before the accident. But in the 1960s, he was working for a furniture company in Montgomery, and he was sweeping up one day, and a pallet of marble fell on his legs, which was like a 1,000-pound pallet. I mean, it was serious. So he no longer had the use of his legs. So he became a painter, and the family with whom he worked at the business had suggested he paint and offered him lessons because a couple of them were artists. And he said, no, I want to find my own way. I want to teach myself, I want to have my own style. So he didn't take lessons, and he painted with house paints on plywood, or people would bring him boards or wood or pieces of furniture. I have a turtle that's the cutout from a sink, just the plywood just an oval. But I'm just going to share a few things from my collection. So this is a self-portrait of Mose. He always depicted himself with his crutches. So it was, really specific to him. And this one is the only one I have with if you notice on his head, there's hair. When I went over to his house one day, he showed me some of his newest works, and I said, well, Mose, how did you get that hair to look so realistic? It's amazing. He said, well, it's my hair. And I said, well, I know it's your hair, but like, you know, he went, no, it's my hair. So he cut his hair and glued it onto his self-portrait. So I said, well, I'll have to have that. So the way it would work is Mose, just to put this in perspective, he was born, they don't know exactly what year, 1920 to 1925 on the 4th of July. And he was born just outside of Montgomery and then moved into Montgomery with his family. He was one of 12 children, and he helped support the family. He only went through 3rd grade because he really didn't have an interest, as he said, in education. So he did odd jobs. He worked in landscaping, and then he worked in the furniture company. But when I met him through the curator at the museum, we would go to his house, and Mose would be sitting on his bed because he couldn't walk without his crutches or a walker. So he would sit on his bed and paint all day. And you would just go visit him, chat with him, he would talk to you about the art. Some of his family members would come in and out. He had 13 children, 11 of whom lived to adulthood. So there's a lot of activity in this small house in Montgomery. But everything was for sale, and his wonderful wife, Willie Mae, who was a childhood friend whom he married, she would always seem to be hovering in the background, so she could keep the purse strings, you know. So when you would hand over your cash, Willie Mae would say, "That's great, okay," and put that away, make sure it went to a good cause. But he was a real character. He loved to talk, and I just had some wonderful memories of going, just stopping by, talking to him, always leaving with something. And here's another piece. I mentioned that my son, when he was really young, collected Santa Clauses. So Mose gave him a Santa Claus, which is kind of like a self-portrait too. But it's a Santa Claus that went into my son's collection, which was pretty great. He doesn't really care about the rest of his Santa Clauses, but this one's pretty special. Mose was really known for his sort of fantasy, whimsical animals, a lot of birds, all sorts of, I have one painting that is a squirrel hunt. I didn't know that's what it was. I asked Mose, because, well, that man in the tree is hunting squirrels, but surrounded by like a moose and all these other animals all around, but he's on a squirrel hunt. And then another interesting feature is he would always get it ready for you to hang, of course. So his little soda can tops, that's what he rigged for all his paintings, so you could hang it right on. So that was this is another, here's a bird. So you can see it's all just odd shapes of wood that he acquired, and he often, so this is a bird that he did, and he actually sometimes would paint them upside down, but that was purposeful. It just depended on where he was sitting and how it fit on his lap, you know. But he did do a lot of birds. And his full name is Mose Tolliver, but he signs everything Mose T. So when you look him up, or you'll see Mose T, that was his sign off. And the S's are backwards, perhaps dyslexic. I'm not sure, but that is how he would sign it. In the exhibit, I have a dresser that he painted for me. So he painted the drawers. So I brought the drawers to him and kept the dresser at home. And this was right before my second son was born. I already had one dresser I did that with, and so I thought, I'll get another one. So I brought him the drawers, and he painted them all with these really neat animals. Got the turtle here. And when I went to pick them up, I got word from somebody, they're ready, you know, so I went by to get them, and you don't see it. I went by to get them, and he said, I didn't see them anywhere. And where are they, Mose? And he said, well, they're in the closet over there, because somebody asked, they just wanted to buy the drawers. What were you going to do with just the drawers, Mose? He said, I don't know. You know, so he had so many visitors. It was pretty incredible. His artwork is included at the Metropolitan, the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, Smithsonian, National Museum of American Art, and so he's definitely gotten out there now. But I do have two quotes for you. One is when we did the exhibit in Montgomery in 1980, he said, I'm not interested in art, I just want to paint my pictures. And he really did painted things he knew, although people would sometimes bring him pictures, because I actually bought one that's the Statue of Liberty. I had never been there before, so my brother has that one, because he was living in New York, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun. But then I have another quote. Dr. Robert Bishop, who was at the time director of the Museum of American Folk Art in New York, he said of Mose's paintings, you can hang him beside a Picasso, and you have the same kind of creativity and deep personal vision. So that was pretty powerful. But at any rate, this was an experience I had getting to know an artist, collecting his work. I couldn't stop. It was an addiction. You know, I mean, he lived so near where I live, downtown Montgomery, and I could just keep going. He died in 2006 of pneumonia. There was a procession of 100 people to his service. So he had quite a following, lots of friends. This is a great guy. This is a picture of the dresser, but I hope you'll all go upstairs if you haven't seen it yet. So those are all the drawers. Snake, birds here, the upside down birds. Yeah. Yeah, and a dog. I think that's a cane. He does Coca-Cola dog. He would say, you asked him and he would name them all. So I think that was a Coca-Cola dog. And I have a picture here of my sons with Mose. So this is in about 2003, maybe 3 years before he died. So we were in Atlanta at that time, living in Atlanta, but I would still come down to see Mose. So I have a picture of the boys when they were really little with Mose, sitting on the bed with him. And then this is actually on his porch. But you can see his pants just covered in paint. You know, everything, the chair, everything. There's just paint everywhere. And people would bring him the paints, you know, whatever was the color of the day, you know. And he would do maybe, you know, he could do 10 paintings in a day. That was his game, which is fantastic. But while I was living in Atlanta, I got to know some other artists. So just to say that my folk art collection extends to other artists, about one piece. So I got to know Howard Finster, who, if you're not familiar with him, he was a real interesting character. He was Reverend Howard Finster. I know Lucinda has met him. He's no longer living, but he actually would make a note as to how many works. This is the 9,723rd work of his. He was prolific. You know, this says, I preach the Bible, the Book of Life by Howard Finster, from God, Man of Visions. He was known as Man of Visions, so that's his book there. On the back, you know, since 1976 he was working, and this one's from December 12th, 1988. God bless you all, the little bird on the back. Oh, and he also put what time he painted it. So he painted this at, I don't know, 11 at night. So he was prolific, but I did get to know him. We had an exhibit in Montgomery of his work, so we brought him there. We also brought him to the High Museum when I was working there. And he played music, played the banjo, so I have a little record of his. I'm Just a Tack in the, what is it? I'm Just a Tack in the, something of your roof. It's quite interesting, and so he was great, and I got to actually drive him. My husband and I took him out to dinner. We got to spend all this time with him that other people weren't spending time with him. And so I was asked in Montgomery to drive him from Montgomery to Somerville, Georgia, where he lived outside Atlanta. So we drove him in the car. Now he actually got to be on the Joni Kersing show once. And he brought this Polaroid camera and he would take pictures everywhere. So he has pictures of clouds out the window when he was flying on the plane, showed those to Joni Kersing, look at these pictures. So he took pictures of my steering wheel when I went into the bank before driving. He said, could I take a picture of your steering wheel? And when we got to while we were driving, he burst into song. He chewed tobacco. He had a little medicine bottle that he would spit in. So he's sitting in my car, and Michael was asleep in the back. He fell asleep in the back of the car, and Howard was sitting next to me. And all of a sudden, Howard just burst into song. Tobacco. Michael, I could see in my rear view. Michael just went, oh my God, where am I? What was that? But he built a huge, beautiful church, folk art church. The property is still there. It's a foundation now. You can go to Somerville, Georgia, and see Howard's place. It's pretty incredible. As we toured the church, Michael, who did a lot of building and carpentry, was saying, this should not be standing. Physics say this is not safe. And we went all the way to the top with Howard. But anyway, that's just a little bit about one of my favorite folk artists who I got to know while I was in Alabama. So, thank you. Now, Bruce Burgess is going to tell us about, let me get my phone away from here, his incredible Fiesta Tableware collection. You can go and I'll leave the storage.
I'm really excited and pleased that I was asked to exhibit in this exhibit. I had no idea where it would lead me. So in your invitation that you received or saw on the internet, I submitted a picture of 6 pieces to Mary. And when she said, yeah, you're in, bring one piece. So through some negotiation, she relented and said, okay, 2 pieces for the show, so I brought 3. But the very first sentence in her invitation says, ever wonder what drives a collector? So I thought I'd attempt to answer that first, so we just get it out of the way, and that you receive the price of admission. So for me, there are 4 factors. One was exposure. My father was a curator of exhibits at a maritime museum. So I grew up as a museum brat, and I like to look at things in cases. The next thing was that affected me was necessity. I reviewed this answer with my wife Mary Alice, and she thought it was politically acceptable. I needed dinnerware during a change in marital status. So I had to eat off of something. But then there is the factor of nostalgia, which I think affects collectors. You have some past associations with that. And in my case, my mother used Fiesta, not a lot of it, but she had it on the dinner table, and that's where I remember that coming from. And one of the most popular things that collectors here, collectors of Fiesta ware here or other places, they say, my grandmother has that stuff. So it was ubiquitous in the 30s. And finally, for collectors, there's the challenge. It's the thrill of the hunt and the acquisition. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth it. And so, throughout the preparation of this, I had the opportunity to become much more familiar with the company, which I think is important to know. The company, the Lachlan Pottery Company, as it was first known, started out in East Liverpool, Ohio. And that's a very peculiar place to start a company, but it was the center where you could have raw materials were readily available in terms of clay, and it was a particular kind of clay, which I might mention. And they also had transportation because it was on the Ohio River. And so before the Lachlan Pottery Company got involved, yellowware or yellow pottery started to be popular in 1840. The Lachlans came along. Brother Homer and Shakespeare Lachlan came along in 1870 and started the Lachlan Pottery Company. And from there, time moves on, and they became very proficient in using the natural material there to make whiteware. Prior to 1870, most of the pottery was yellowware, and it was unrefined. But after 1870, the public taste, which is an important part of this company, they were able to keep their finger on the pulse of the public from the very beginning. Public taste started to change to whiteware or china. It's important for me to mention that what we're looking here is at pottery. Even though it became the Homer Lachlan China Company, this is not china. And a word about the materials that they found in the neighborhood was the clay had a high content of alumina. The content of alumina in clay made it be capable of being fired at very high temperatures without disintegrating. So that was a natural feature of the area. Anyway, things moved on. Shakespeare got out of the company pretty early on. Homer Lachlan continued on, but then he sold the company in the early 1900s to his accountant, who he had hired. The accountant then move the company into the stratosphere almost with the production. One of the first things that they did when they realized a demand for their whiteware, which they had won an award at the Philadelphia Exposition in 1876, and found out how popular it was, they couldn't keep up with the demand. So they changed the types of kilns that were used to fire their pottery from a stationary kiln when you had to heat it up, move everything out, cool it down, move everything else, and to a continuous tunnel kiln, which allowed them to start manufacturing pieces by the millions. So moving on, one of the most important decisions that the company made was to hire a highly regarded English potter whose name was Frederick Reed, R-H-E-A-D, to become the director of design. And they did that in 1927. I have a quote from Frederick. He imagined servingware that should be durable and everyday and usable every day, but yet cheery. The type of plates one would be proud to serve their guests. And the result was Fiestaware. Also, the owner of the company at the time, for whom Frederick Reed worked, said, "This is what will be good for the Depression." Because now we're talking about 1936. This will be good for the Depression. People need to brighten up their table and have something to be happy about. And it worked. The china was inexpensive and it was readily available. So the first edition that came out, it included 34 different pieces of china. And the first thing that happened in 1936, they introduced 5 colors. I'll mention that in a minute, followed by a 6th color. But I think the most important thing about this company was they did their planning. They did market studies to find out who was going to buy it, and they were creative in the development of the design and the styling. So the first thing that Frederick did, they decided through important point for me to mention is that this is probably the first known use of focus groups in the production of a product in the United States. So among the design features that Frederick Reed insisted upon was, what's the texture of the product going to be like? And he made reference to a billiard ball. Well, this is a pool ball, but nevertheless, you can compare this. They did not make pool balls. This is part of the demonstration that I have to show the relationship of the finish. The next thing that they wanted to do was to pick up on the Art Deco motif that was prevalent at the time. We're talking about the early 30s. And so the design of it had geometric shapes using concentric circles and simple lines that would allow the dinnerware to fit in with almost any existing decor. Color then became a huge point in the production of theirs in order to inspire people to buy this during the Depression. And it was very cheap. You could buy 24 pieces, right? And I was unable to know whether that was 4 pieces of 6-place settings or 6 pieces of 4-place settings. You could buy 24 pieces of Fiestaware for $11. And the other thing that made it very attractive, you could buy it individually, but you could also buy it on time. So much like Singer sewing machines, where you could pay $1 a week and buy your product, you were able to do that with Fiestaware as well. So talking about the colors that were most important, the first color that Frederick Reed decided was he must have red. And red has a peculiar characteristic. it's made out of uranium oxide. And so I want to talk about that in a minute. The next color he said that we must have is blue. Well, we have to have a blue to go with the red. And then I can just imagine them sitting around a conference table and says, well, what's next? And they said, oh, how about a green? A green has to go between the red and that. That led to the decision of a yellow. And then they came upon the decision to use what we call ivory, because according to one story that I read, it clicked with the other colors. All those 5 colors were then produced in 1936. Here comes 1937, and they introduced turquoise. So I'd like to go back for a second to the red. The early colors between 1936 and 1943, that's right, used uranium oxide. But then World War II happened, and the government stopped and seized all the uranium oxide that they could find for the purpose of creating weapons. So red disappeared after 1944 for a period of 16 years. 16 years later, the government then permits companies to license production of their glazes with depleted uranium oxide. And so I'm not going to go into uranium, but when it's depleted, you've lost certain isotopes out of it and it becomes safer. However, people had liked to talk about, well, how safe is it? And radiation is measured in terms of milliroentgens. Even though this isn't red, this is for a demonstration. They said if you strapped a chop plate, a 15-inch chop plate to your chest, what would be the effect? Well, it turns out that there were not enough milliroentgens in a 24-hour period to do any effect. As a matter of fact, the radium in your watch dial was more harmful than the plates. So, but nevertheless, there is this story, and it is true, that red is radioactive. Not only red, but to a lesser degree, the original ivory also had uranium oxide to begin with. But this is so light. If you had a Geiger counter, or if I did, and you put a Geiger counter on there, you would see the needle go forward. And to the red, it would pin the needle. So, but nevertheless, it's determined to be safe. So, in 1936, independent of colors, you could buy 34 pieces. 34 pieces of this material, of these dinnerware, came about in all types of different things. And I'll just show you some different things. Obviously, plates came in about 3 different sizes. Dinner plates, you had small fruit bowls, you had cups and saucers, you had soup bowls, you had coffee cups, then you had decorative items for the table or accessories. You had candlestick holders, and there are other designs of those. You had, it's hard for me to understand how the taste of the American public would be. Here is a demi-tasse cup. Who's drinking demi-tasse cups out of pottery? Well, the company must have thought they did. Here's a marmalade. Here's a container for mustard. Oh, can't forget that if you're smoking, you have to have an ashtray. And a candy dish. And I brought the large pieces to show you what the contrast could be. I mean, here we have a mustard, but then you have this footed salad bowl. So, in addition to the large chop plates, it comes in 3 different sizes. And then the big pieces are interesting to me. This is a coffee pot. This is the tallest of the 3 vases. And when you're on the hunt for your collection, they come up in very unlikely places. This, which came up at an Arthur Smith auction years ago, just up in Cornwall, I saw it being offered, and I couldn't wait to bid on it, and I was wondering how high is this going to go. It went pretty high.
Oh, tell the details.
Well, I think it was over $100 at the time, but what an investment now.
Yeah.
Okay, so you become pretty aggressive in looking once you figure out where you're going with this, or you don't know where you're going with this. So these colors were just came about for up until, I would say, the 50s. Then the company determined that the tastes were changing. Not only that, but they had lost their uranium oxide until 1959. So they decided to come out with what we collectors call the 50s colors. It had chartreuse, forest green, gray, and rose. And that went on until about 1972, and then the company collapsed. Well, the company didn't collapse, but the sale of this collapsed. But then it was rejuvenated because the baby boomers came along and they said, and they found out that there was an abundance of this. I read one figure that there were 500 million pieces of Fiesta produced over from its start in 1936. So it is prolific, and you can find it. It's hard to find these days unless you go on the internet and then start to pay exorbitant prices. So you wanted to know some prices? There is one piece or shape that I don't have, and I wouldn't be able to afford it anyway, and it's called a covered onion soup, which actually came out in 1936. I'm trying to think, who's eating onion soup in 1936?
It had
Well,
a cover
apparently,
on it?
pardon me?
It had a cover
It
on
did.
the bowl?
It did. Had a cover on the bowl, and it occurred to me, well, maybe people were eating soup because of the Depression. I don't have the answer. It was only issued for 1 year, and so you can't find it. And recently, I went on eBay, and there's one sitting there for $500. But in my research, from the New York Times article I read, one was recently bought in a particular color that would have been deemed rare for $8,800. So it's beyond our thing. So let me conclude with this. There's so many things I could have talked about, but what you're not seeing up here, here's a clue. Can you figure out what this is? What the purpose of this?
Butter dish.
There is none.
No butter dish.
No,
They didn't make one?
they did not make one. Which makes me think, did butter come in sticks in the 1930s? I don't know. I can remember my grandmother and mother buying butter in tubs.
Yeah, it would come in a little bowl.
Yeah, so maybe that's the answer. Some other things so bringing you up to date, the colors have changed. My wife and I bought this. This is Fiesta ware. All the Fiesta ware is identified on the bottom. We bought that at Bed Bath & Beyond just a few months ago. So when you're collecting, one of the things that aids a collector generally is that there's documentation, which all of a sudden reveals to the collector, oh my God, look at that, I gotta have one of those. So the hunt starts, and then it leads to all kinds of other things. And there's a category in Fiesta, not made by the company at all, but collectors, called go-alongs. So, oh, that might go along with the Fiesta. So little things that you might find in the Fiesta colors. you might pick up that, oh, that Fiesta Mexican, okay, that's cool. And then you find other little things. This is a memento of the 75th anniversary of the Homer Laughlin China Company. And in 2020, they changed the name of the company to the Fiesta Ware Company. So Homer Laughlin's name is long gone. So I run out of time. This is a go along.
I see.
The Homer Laughlin never made a clock out of Fiesta Ware.
Does anybody have any questions for anyone before we let you go see the exhibit if you'd like? Any questions? Linda?
Mary, on your pieces, what do you do for like preservation or taking care of them on those odd pieces of wood?
Right. Well, fortunately, because they're just house paint and on the wood is not deteriorating at all, so I haven't. The only thing that I've seen is possibly a little fading, but it doesn't tend to fade much since it's really like house paint out, outside, some inside paint. The only one the ones I'm most concerned about would be like the hair is definitely starting to come off in some places, and I haven't done anything to preserve it at this point, and I don't know what I will do. But the others, there might be a little fading, and that was it. So I'm just careful where I hang them, because once they're faded or gone, some of his signatures are faded a little bit.
When did you get the first one?
1980.
80.
Yeah. And so I probably collected them for 20 years, while I was down there. Yeah. Right? So, a good question. Not a lot that I have to do, I don't think, at this point. But if you go on eBay, sometimes you'll see them for sale. People sell them for astronomical prices. I don't know that they get those prices. Yeah, they're there.
So I have a question for Bruce.
Yes.
If you bought a set, like the 4 place settings of 6, whatever it was, if you bought it, were the colors mixed?
That I don't know that.
Oh.
But it was intended that the entire collection be mix and match. So it's possible that you could select the colors that you wanted to mix and match, or you could have it as a set, everything one color. But Frederick Reed, the designer, intended this to be bought individually and then mix and match. So when you're setting the table, if you have this, which we use, oh, by the way, I didn't mention that it's dishwasher safe. He didn't know that, but it is. We don't put it in the microwave. But when you're setting the table for guests, to have a festive evening, or you just mix it up.
I'll take that.
Any other questions?
Just a quickie. Is it me, or does the red look orange?
It does look orange.
I agree.
It is, but that's right. It's not as red as the bowl that we just bought. But
Except
that
for
is
the
Fiesta.
raspberry red over
Yeah, the
there.
new one.
That is called Fiesta Red. So you're correct.
Well, thank you all for coming. We have a few more events coming up that I want you to know about, and I have them right here in a handy list, so I don't forget anything. This Friday, we have a reception opening for our newest exhibit that's being installed as we speak. Artists in the Archives, Community History and Collage. And the guest curator, Rick Cassini, will be here. And the museum had invited the archives, Eva Garceland-Hart, working with Rick, invited collage artists from all around, even outside the United States, to create works inspired by and using scans from our archives of images, ephemera, other pieces. So they got to look at our collection, make their selection, and the collages are amazing. Really wonderful. So I encourage you to come. The party will be this Friday, 5 to 7, free, open to the public. So I encourage you. It's going to be beautiful weather, and Rick will be there as well, so you can chat with him. And the show will be up until January 7th. Next Wednesday will be the next Meet the Collectors, part 2. So we'll have 4 more collectors speaking, and the list is on our website. And then it is still tick season. So on September 9th, we're going to have a talk by a Middlebury College professor about ticks, to continue our talks about bugs. So that's a tick talk. So we're really happy to have also sponsorship for these programs. The Friday programs, Table 21 has supported them. So we're really grateful for that. But that's what's coming up. We have a lot more too, so check the website. Lots more events going on. And then like we said, the following Wednesday will be part 3 of Meet the Collectors. So, thanks to all of you for speaking today. It was really so informative and fun. And thank you all for coming. Oh, and 3 additional